welcome to another chapter of reading. So let's get started, shall we? Chapter 2, In Memoriam. Harry was bleeding, clutching his right hand in his left and swearing under his breath. He shouldered upon his bedroom door. There was a crunch of breaking china. He had trodden on a cup of cold tea that had been sitting on the floor outside his bedroom door. He looked around. The landing of number 4 Pivot Drive was deserted. Possibly the cup of tea was Dudley's idea of a clever booby trap. Oh, Harry, if only you knew. Keeping his bleeding hand elevated, Harry scraped the fragments of cup together with the other hand and threw them into the already crammed bin just visible inside his bedroom door. Then he trampled across to the bathroom to run his finger under the tap. It was stupid, pointless, irritating beyond belief that he still had 4 days left of being unable to perform magic. But he had to admit to himself that this jagged cut on his finger would have defeated him. He had never learned how to repair wounds. And now he came to think of it. Particularly in light of his immediate plans, this seemed a serious flaw in his magical education. Yeah, you would think they would teach you healing spells at Hogwarts, rather than relying on potions only. Making a mental note to ask Hermione how it was done, he used a large wad of toilet paper to mop up as much of the tea as he could before returning to his bedroom and slamming the door behind him. Harry spent the morning completely emptying his school trunk for the first time since he had packed it 6 years ago. At the start of the intervening school years, he had nearly skimmed off the topmost 3/4 of the contents and replaced or updated them, leaving a layer of general debris at the bottom. Old quills, desiccated beetle eyes, single socks that no longer fit. Hey, you could give those to Dobby. Oh, that realization makes me sad given what happens later. Advanced Potterheads, you already know. Newcomers, you're gonna have to wait. Minutes previously, Harry had plunged his hand into this mold, experienced a stabbing pain in the 4th finger of his right hand, and withdrawn it to see a wand of blood. He now proceeded a little more cautiously. Oh, Harry. Kneeling down beside the trunk again, he groped around in the bottom, and after retrieving an old badge that flickered feebly between support Cedric Diggory and Potter sinks, a cracked and worn-out sneakoscope, and a gold locket inside with a note signed R.A.B. had become hidden. He finally discovered the sharp edge that had done the damage. He recognized it at once. It was a 2-inch long fragment of the enchanted mirror that his dead godfather, Sirius, had given him. Oh, hugs for Harry. Harry laid it aside and felt cautiously around the trunk for the rest. But nothing more remained of his godfather's last gift except powdered glass, which clung to the deepest layer of debris and like glittering grit. Harry sat up and examined the jagged piece on which he had cut himself, seeing nothing but his own bright green eye reflected back at him. Then he placed the fragment on top of that morning's Daily Prophet, which lay unread on the bed, and attempted to stem the sudden purge of bitter memories. The stabs of regret and of mourning the discovery of the broken mirror had occasioned by attacking the rest of the rubbish in the trunk. It took another hour to sort it, or empty it completely, throw away the useless items, and sort the remainder in piles according to whether or not he would need them from now on. His school and Quidditch robes, cauldron, parchment, quills, and most of his textbooks were piled in a corner to be left behind. He wondered what his aunt and uncle would do with them. Burn them in the dead of night, probably, as if they were the evidence of some dreadful crime. His Muggle clothing, invisibility cloak, potion-making kit, certain books, and the photograph album Hagrid had once given him. A stack of letters, and his wand had been repacked into an old rucksack. In the front pocket were the Marauders map and the locket with the note signed R.A.B. inside it. The locket was accorded this place of honor not because it was valuable, in all usual senses it was worthless, but because of what it cost to obtain it. This left a sizable stack of newspapers sitting on his desk beside his snowy owl Hedwig, one for each of the days Harry had spent at Pipit Drive this summer. Oh. Knowing what happens to Hedwig later in the book makes me hug Harry. I forgot to mention last week, but you are going to need several boxes of tissues handy for this entire book. I promise. If you make it without crying, kudos, but trust me, you're probably going to cry at some point. So be prepared. Or be prepared. Sorry, I'm also a Disney fan, as you probably guessed. But anyway, back to Potter. He got up off the floor, stretched, and moved across his desk. Hedwig made no movement as he began to flick through the newspapers, throwing them onto the rubbish pile one by one. The owl was asleep, or else faking. She was angry with Harry about the limited amount of time she was allowed out of her cage at the moment. Aww. Again, hugs for Harry given what happens to Hedwig later. As he neared the bottom of the pile of newspapers, Harry slowed down, searching for one particular issue that he knew had arrived shortly after he had returned to Pipit Drive for the summer. He remembered that there had been a small mention on the front about the resignation of Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies teacher at Hogwarts. At last, he found it. Turning to page 10, he sank into his desk chair and reread the article he had been looking for. Albus Dumbledore Remembered by Alpheus Stowage. I met Albus Dumbledore at the age of 11 on our first day at Hogwarts. Our mutual attraction was undoubtedly due to the fact that we both felt of ourselves to be outsiders. I had contracted dragonpox shortly before arriving at school, and while I was no longer contagious, my pock-marked visage and greenish hue did not encourage many to approach me. For his part, Albus had arrived at Hogwarts under the burden of unwanted notoriety. Scarcely a year previously, his father, Percival, had been convicted of a savage and well-publicized attack on 3 Muggles. Albus never attempted to deny his father, who was to die in Azkaban, had committed this crime. On the contrary, when I plucked up courage to ask him, he assured me that he knew his father to be guilty. Beyond that, Dumbledore refused to speak of the sad business, though many attempted to make him do so. Indeed, some were disposed to praise his father's action and assume that Albus, too, was a Muggle hater. They could not have been more mistaken, as anybody who knew Albus would attest. He never revealed the remotest anti-Muggle tendency. Indeed, his determined support for Muggle rights gained him many enemies in subsequent years. In a matter of months, however, Albus's own fame had begun to eclipse that of his father. By the end of his first year, he would never again be known as the son of a muckle hater, but as nothing more or less than the most brilliant student ever seen at the school. Those of us who were privileged to be his friends benefited from his example, not to mention his help and encouragement, with which he was always generous. He confessed to me later in life that he knew even then that his greatest pleasure lay in teaching. He not only won every prize of note that the school offered, he was soon in regular correspondence with the most magical names of the day, including Nicholas Flamel, the celebrated alchemist, Bathilda Bagshot, the noted historian, foreshadowing, well, kind of, but still foreshadowing, and Aldebert Wafflin, the magical theoretician. Several of his papers found their way into learned publications, such as Transfiguration Today, Challenges in Charming, and The Practical Potioneer. Love the alliterative bonus. Dumbledore's future career seemed likely to be meteoric, and the only question that remained was when he would become Minister of Magic, though it was often predicted in later years that he was on the point of taking the job. However, he never had ministerial ambitions. 3 years after we had started at Hogwarts, Albus's brother Aberforth, foreshadowing, arrived at school. They were not alike. Aberforth was never bookish, and unlike Albus, preferred to settle arguments by dueling rather than reasoned discussion. Again, foreshadowing. However, it is quite wrong to suggest, as some have, that the brothers were not friends. They rubbed along as comfortably as such different boys could do. In fairness to Aberforth, it must be admitted that living in Albus's shadow cannot have been an altogether comfortable experience. Being continually outshone was an occupational hazard of being his friend, and could not have been any more pleasurable but as a brother. When Albus and I left Hogwarts, we intended to take the traditional tour of the world together, visiting and observing foreign wizards, before pursuing our separate careers. However, tragedy intervened. On the very eve of our trip, Albus's mother, Kendra, died, leaving Albus the head and sole breadwinner of the family. I postponed my departure long enough to pay my respects at Kendra's funeral, then left for what was now to be a solitary journey with the younger brother and sister, foreshadowing, to care for, and little could left to them. There could no longer be any question of Albus accompanying me. That was the period of our lives when we had least contact. I wrote to Albus describing, perhaps insensitively, the wonders of my journey, from narrow escapes from chimeras and grace to the experiments of the Egyptian alchemists. His letters told me little of his day-to-day life, which I guessed to be frustrating dull for such a brilliant wizard. Immersed in my own experiences, it was with horror that I heard, toward the end of my year's travels, that yet another tragedy had struck the Dumbledores. The death of his sister, Ariana. Again, she's foreshadowing. The mentions of her is foreshadowing. Just like the mentions of Aberforth are foreshadowing. Though Ariana had been in poor health for a long time, the blow, coming so soon after the loss of their mother, had a profound effect on both of her brothers. All those closest to Albus, and I count myself one of that lucky number, agree that Ariana's death and Albus's feeling of personal responsibility for it, though of course he was guiltless, left their mark upon him forevermore. I returned home to find the young man who had experienced a much older person's suffering. Albus was more reserved than before, and much less light-hearted. To add to his misery, the loss of Ariana had led not to a renewed closeness between Albus and Aberforth, but to an estrangement. In time, this would lift. In later years, they re-established, if not a close relationship, then certainly a cordial one. However, he rarely spoke of his parents or of Ariana from then on, and his friends learned not to mention them. Other quills would describe the triumphs of the following years. Dumbledore's innumerable contributions to the store of wizarding knowledge, including his discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood. I would like to very much know what those uses are, thank you. Like, what are they? Are they used in healing? Are they used in potions? Do they affect wand work at all? Like, I must know! Will benefit generations to come, as will the wisdom he displayed in the many judgments he made while chief warlock of the Wizarding God. They say still that no wizarding duel ever matched that between Dumbledore and Grindelwald in 1945. Those who witnessed it have written of the terror and all they felt as they watched those two extraordinary wizards do battle. Dumbledore's triumph and its consequences for the wizarding world are considered a turning point in magical history, to match the introduction of the International Statute of Secrecy or the downfall of he who must not be named. Albus Dumbledore was never proud or vain. He could always find something to value in anyone. Aww. I have that in common with Dumbledore, and it's touching, but it's also bittersweet. However apparently insignificant or what, and I believe that his early losses endowed him with great humanity and sympathy. I shall miss his friendship more than I can say, but my losses is nothing as compared to the Wizarding World's. That he was the most inspiring and the best loved of all Hogwarts headmasters cannot be in question. He died as he lived, working always for the greater good, and to his last hour, as willing to stretch out a hand to a small boy with dragon pox as he was on the day that I met him. Hugs for Harry in this moment. Harry finished reading and continued to gaze at the picture accompanying the obituary, which looks like that, in case you're wondering. Hold on. There. It looks like that, in case you're wondering. Dumbledore was wearing his familiar, kindly smile. But as he peered over the top of his half-moon spectacles, he gave the impression, even in newsprint, of X-raying Harry, whose sadness mingled with a sense of humiliation. He thought he knew Dumbledore quite well, but ever since reading this obituary, he had been forced to recognize that he had barely known him at all. Never once had he imagined Dumbledore's childhood or youth. It was as though he had sprung into being as Harry had known him, venerable and silver-haired and old. The idea of a teenage Dumbledore was simply odd, like trying to imagine a stupid Hermione or a friendly blast-ended Scrooge. Yeah, that would be a little, what am I looking for? A little jarring. He never thought to ask Dumbledore about his past. No doubt it would have felt strange, impertinent even, but after all, it had been common knowledge that Dumbledore had taken part in that legendary duel with Grindelwald. And Harry had thought to ask Dumbledore what that had been like, nor about any of his other famous achievements. No, they always discussed Harry. Harry's past, Harry's future, Harry's plans. And it seemed to Harry now, despite the fact that his future was so dangerous and so uncertain, that he had missed the irreplaceable opportunities when he had failed to ask Dumbledore more about himself. Even though the only personal question he had ever asked his headmaster was also the only one that he suspected that Dumbledore had not answered honestly. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. Nice callback to Sorcerer's Stone. After several minutes' thought, Harry tore the obituary out of the Prophet, folded it carefully, and stuck it inside the first volume of Practical Defensive Magic and its use against the dark arts. Then he threw the rest of the newspaper onto the rubbish pile and turned to face the room. It was much tidier. Well, mine isn't, but it's organized chaos in my defense, okay, people? The only things left out of place were today's Daily Prophet, still lying on the bed, and on top of it, the piece of the broken mirror. Harry moved across the room, slid the mirror fragment off today's Prophet, and unfolded the newspaper. He had merely glanced at the headline when he had taken the rolled-up paper from the delivery out early that morning and thrown it aside, after noting it said nothing about Voldemort. Harry was sure that the ministry was leaning on the Prophet to suppress news about Voldemort. It was only now, therefore, that he saw what he had missed. Across the bottom half of the front page was a smaller headline set over a picture of Dumbledore striding along looking harried. Dumbledore, the truth at last? Coming next week, the shocking story of the flawed genius considered by many to be the greatest wizard of his generation. Stripping away the popular image of the ring silver-bearded wisdom, Rita Skeeter reveals the disturbed childhood, the lawless youth, the lifelong feuds, and the guilty secrets that Dumbledore carried to his grave. Why was the man to be tipped Minister of Magic content to remain a mere headmaster? What was the real purpose of the secret organization known as the Order of the Phoenix? How did Dumbledore really meet his end? The answers to these and many more questions are to be explored in the explosive new biography, The Life and Lives of Albus Dumbledore, by Rita Skeeter, exclusively interviewed by Betty Braithwaite. Page 13, inside. Harry ripped open the paper and found page 13. Well, I know it's not a newspaper, but page 13 starts the chapter. The article was topped with a picture showing another familiar face. A woman wearing jeweled glasses with elaborately curled blonde hair, her teeth bared and what was clearly supposed to be a winning smile, wiggling her fingers up at him. Doing his best to ignore this nauseating image, Harry read on. In person, Rita Skeeter is much warmer and softer than her famously ferocious quill portraits might suggest. Yeah, okay. You do not need to convince me of that because I am not convinced in the slightest. Ugh. Like, who misspells something or who does not use proper grammar? Like, ugh. Rita Skeeter irks me, okay? Greeting me in the hallway of her cozy home, she leads me straight into the kitchen for a cup of tea, a slice of pound cake. I love a good pound cake. And it goes without saying, a steaming vat of precious gossip. But of course Dumbledore is a biographer's dream, says Skeeter. Such a long, full life. I'm sure my book will be the first of very, very many. I really hate Rita Skeeter. Skeeter was certainly quick off the mark. Her 900-page book was completed in a mere 4 weeks after Dumbledore's mysterious death in June. 900-page book completed in 4 weeks. Did you even eat or sleep, Rita? Like Beaver's House, if I wrote a 900-page book in 4 weeks, that would be nice, but I would also be incredibly exhausted and possibly hungry. So again, did you even eat or sleep, Rita? Like, anyway, I asked her how she managed this super fast feat. Oh, when you've been a journalist as long as I have, working to a deadline is second nature. I knew that the wizarding world was clamoring for the full story, and I wanted to be the first to meet that need. I mentioned the recent widely publicized remarks about Bias Dodge, special advisor to the Wizarding God and long-standing friend of Albus Dumbledore's, that Skeeter's book contains less fact than a chocolate frog card. I mean, probably valid. Skeeter throws her head and laughs. Darling Dodgy! I remember interviewing him a few years back about merpeople rights. Bless him, completely gaga. Seemed to think we were sitting at the bottom of Lake Windermere. Kept telling me to watch out for trout. And yet Alphaeus' Dodge accusations of inaccuracy had been echoed in many places. Does Skeeter really feel that 4 short weeks had been enough to gain a full picture of Dumbledore's known and extraordinary life? Oh, my dear Beam Skeeter, wrapping me affectionately across the knuckles. Oh, my dear Beam Skeeter, wrapping me affectionately across the knuckles. You know as well as I do how much information can be generated by a fat bag of Kellions. A refusal to hear the word no, and a nice sharp quick quotes quill. I would still take that quill and break it. What? I would. I'm sure it's no different from breaking a pencil. And yes, I have done that before. People were queuing to dish that dirt on Dumbledore anyway. Not when everyone thought he was so wonderful, you know. He trod an awful lot of important toes. But old Dodgy Dodge can get off his high hippogriff. I love these wizarding euphemisms. Because I've had access to his source most journalists would swap their wands for. One who has never spoken in public before, and who was close to Dumbledore during the most turbulent and disturbing phase of his youth. The advanced publicity for Skeeter's biography has certainly suggested that there will be shocks in store for those who believe Dumbledore to have led a blameless life. What were the biggest surprises she uncovered, I ask. And come to think of it, Betty, I'm not giving away all the highlights before anybody's got the book, laughed Skeeter. But I can promise that anybody who still thinks Dumbledore was white as his beard is in for a rude awakening. Let's say that nobody heard him hearing rage against you-know-who would have dreamed that he dabbled in the dark arts himself in his youth. And for a wizard who spent his later years pleading for tolerance, he wasn't exactly broad-minded when he was younger. Yes, Albus Dumbledore had an extremely murky past, not to mention that very fishy family, which he worked so hard to keep hush up. I ask whether Skeeter is referring to Dumbledore's brother Aberforth, whose conviction by the Wisdom God for misuse of magic caused a minor scandal 15 years ago. Oh, Aberforth is just the tip of the dung heap, laughed Skeeter. No, I'm talking about much worse than a brother with a fondness for fiddling about with ghosts. Worse even than the muggle-maiming father. Dumbledore couldn't keep them quiet anyway. They were both charged by the Wisdom God. Oh, it's the mother and sister that intrigued me. And a little digging uncovered a positive nest of nastiness. But as I say, you'll have to wait for chapters 9 to 12 for full details. All I can say now is it's no wonder Dumbledore never talked about how his nose got broken. Family skeletons notwithstanding, Skeeter denied the brilliance that led to Dumbledore's many magical discoveries. He had brains, she concedes, although many now question whether he could really take full credit for all his supposed achievements, as I revealed in chapter 16. Ivor Dinnensby claims he had already discovered 8 uses of dragon's blood when Dumbledore borrowed his papers. But the importance of some of Dumbledore's achievements cannot, I venture, be denied. What of his famous defeat of Grindelwald? Oh, I'm glad you mentioned Grindelwald, says Skeeter with a tantalizing smile. I'm afraid that those who go teary-eyed over Dumbledore's spectacular victory must bring themselves for a bombshell, or perhaps a dung bomb. Very dirty business indeed. All I'm saying is, don't be so sure that there really was that spectacular duel of vengeance. After they read my book, people may be forced to conclude that Grindelwald simply conjured a white handkerchief at the end of his blog and came quietly. Yeah. Skeeter refuses to give any more away on this intriguing subject, so we turn instead to the relationships that would have undoubtedly fascinate her readers more than any other. Oh yes, says Skeeter, nodding briskly. I devote an entire chapter to the whole Potter-Dumbledore relationship. It's been called unhealthy, even sinister. Again, your readers will have to buy the book for the whole story. But there is no question that Dumbledore took an unnatural interest in Potter from the word go. Whether that was really in the boy's best interest, well, we'll see. It's certainly an open secret that Potter has had a most troubled adolescence.
Yeah, because of the Dursleys, not Dumbledore. Ugh, I hate Rita Skeeter.
I ask whether Skeeter is still in touch with Harry Potter, whom she so famously interviewed last year, a breakthrough piece in which Potter spoke exclusively of his conviction that you-know-who had returned. Oh yes, we've developed a close bond, says Skeeter.
Close bond. Close bond my butt.
Poor Potter has few real friends.
Again, because of his upbringing at the Dursleys. Oh, I really hate Rita Skeeter.
And we met at one of the most testing moments of his life, the Traversal Tournament. I am probably one of the only people alive who can say that they know the story of Harry Potter.
Yeah, you know the real Potter, my butt, indeed. I would really love to break your quotes quill.
Which leads us neatly into the many rumors still circulating about Dumbledore's final hours. The Skeeter believed that Potter was there when Dumbledore died. Well, he was, but he didn't actively take part in it. Or he was, but not in the way they're thinking. Like, we know what happened. We know the truth of what happened. I would love to break Rita's quick quotes quill. I know I've mentioned that before, but it's just so irritating and infuriating. And yes, I hate Rita Skeeter, you can tell. But anyway. Well, I don't want to say too much. It's all in the book. But eyewitnesses inside Hogwarts Castle saw Potter running away from the scene moments after Dumbledore fell, jumped, or was pushed. Potter later gave evidence against Severus Snape, a man against whom he has a notorious grudge. Is everything as it seems? That's for the wizarding community to decide. Once they've read my book. On that intriguing note, I take my leave. There can be no doubt that Skeeter has quilled an instant bestseller. Dumbledore's legions of admirers, meanwhile, may be trembling at what is soon to emerge about their hero. Harry reached the bottom of the article, but continued to stare blankly at the page. Revulsion and fury rose in him like vomit. I mean, yeah, it was hard not to react, and I ended up reacting, as you've heard. He balled up the newspaper and threw it, with all his force, at the wall, where it joined the rest of the rubbish heaped around his overflowing bin. He began to stride blindly around the room, opening empty drawers and picking up books, only to replace them on the same piles, barely conscious of what he was doing. As railing faces from Rita's article echoed in his head. An entire chapter to the whole Potter-Dumbledore relationship. It's been called unhealthy, even sinister. He dabbled in the dark arts himself in his youth. I've had access to a source most journalists would swap their wands for. Lies! Harry bellowed. And through the window he saw the next-door neighbor who had paused to restart his lawnmower, look up nervously. Harry sat down hard on the bed. The broken bit of mirror danced away from him. He picked it up and turned it over in his fingers, thinking of Dumbledore, and the lies with which Rita Skeeter was defaming him. The flash of the brightest blue. Harry froze, his cut finger slipping on the jagged edge of the mirror again. He had imagined it. He must have done. Nope. And you'll find out why much, much, much later, new Potterheads. Advanced Potterheads you already know. He glanced over his shoulder, but the wall was a sickly peach color of Aunt Petunia's choosing. There was nothing blue in there for the mirror to reflect. He peered into the mirror fragment again, and saw nothing but his own bright green eye looking back at him. He had imagined it. There was no other explanation. Imagine it because he had been thinking of his dead headmaster. If anything was certain, it was that the bright blue eyes of Albus Dumbledore would never pierce him again. Oh, hugs for Harry.
But that is the end of this short chapter. Join me next week for chapter 3, The Dursleys Departing. Until then, bye!